Imagine standing completely alone in a room filled with the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and they're all laughing at you. That's exactly where Ambassador Sarah Chen found herself. She was just one person in a simple gray suit, standing on the floor of a chamber so massive it had its own weather. Floating all around her were the representatives of 73 alien species, each one looking down on her with amusement. If you've ever felt like the underdog, you're going to want to hear what she does next, because it's a moment that would change the galaxy forever. She had just told them that Earth was claiming a huge chunk of space for itself, a 50 light-year bubble around our solar system. The council's speaker, a bird-like alien named Tom Von, practically chuckled. "Let me get this straight," he chirped. "Your species, who just figured out faster-than-light travel 80 years ago, wants to fence off a part of the galaxy?" Sarah's voice didn't waver. "That is correct." She was impossibly calm, standing before the beings who could snuff out a civilization before breakfast. Tom Von pressed on, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "And you actually expect everyone to just stay out?" "We expect all star-faring species to respect the boundary, yes," she replied. The chamber exploded with noise. The translators did their best, but it was a chaotic mix of disbelief and outright laughter. A few of the more aggressive species looked genuinely insulted, but through it all, Ambassador Chen just waited. She stood perfectly still, hands behind her back, letting them get it all out of their systems. Finally, Tom Von raised a wing, calling for quiet. The mocking simmered down, but you could still feel it hanging in the air. "Ambassador," he began, "your people have 12 colonies. 12. The Zatharan Empire next to you controls 47 entire star systems. Others here govern hundreds of worlds. What could possibly justify such an outrageous request?" Sarah looked right at him. "We are not requesting," she said calmly. "We are informing." A deep, gravelly voice suddenly cut through the air. "Informing? Or threatening?" Every head turned toward the Zitharan pod where the hulking form of High Commander Velkoth leaned into view. The Zitharans were warriors, built like tanks, and they'd carved out their empire with brute force. "We aren't threatening anyone," Chen said, turning to face the four-armed commander. "We're setting a boundary and asking for it to be respected." Velkoth's mandibles clicked in a gesture that was supposed to be a smile. "You ask for nothing. You stand there and declare that a massive piece of the galaxy now belongs to your baby race and expect us to just roll over." "Yes," Chen said, plain and simple. The commander let out a laugh that sounded like an avalanche. "And if we say no? Are your 12 little colonies going to declare war on the entire galaxy?" "We hope it doesn't come to that." Velkoth puffed out his chest, a truly intimidating sight. "Let me tell you something about your hope, human. We've crushed empires with technology that would make your head spin. We've wiped out fleets 10 times bigger than your entire navy. And you think you can tell us where we can and cannot fly?" Sarah's expression remained a perfect poker face. "Commander Velkoth, I would strongly advise—" "You will advise nothing," he roared. "The main trade route from our space to the outer rim cuts right through your little exclusion zone. We've used it for 3,000 years. Do you honestly think we're going to change course because a species that still uses primitive fusion drives asks nicely?" "The route can be rerouted," Chen said. "It would only add about 6 days to your trip. A minor inconvenience when you consider the alternative." "The alternative to what? Insulting the Zatharan Empire by forcing us to go around your pathetic little territory?" Velkoth was furious. "No, Ambassador, I will not change our route. In fact, I think it's high time someone taught your species its place." A hush fell over the chamber. The laughter was long gone. When a Zatharan High Commander talked about teaching lessons, it usually involved warships and explosions. Commander, Tom Von said nervously. Perhaps we can discuss this diplomatically. There's nothing to discuss, Velkoth snapped. In 3 of your months, our trade fleet will pass through your so-called zone on its usual path. If the humans want to stop us, they can try. I imagine they'll learn very quickly why children should listen to their elders. And with that, his screen went dark. Sarah Chen stood alone in the silence. All around her, the council members started whispering. Some looked worried, but most looked like they were getting ready to watch a good show. A few even looked at her with pity. The speaker, Tom Von, cleared his throat. Ambassador Chen, the council can't get involved in the affairs of individual empires. If the Zitherans enter your space, we won't stop them. But I have to warn you, if you attack their ships, it will be considered an act of war. Earth will stand alone. We understand, Chen said. Do you really? A new voice chimed in. It was Ambassador Creel, an ancient being from one of the most respected species. She leaned forward, her old eyes fixed on Sarah. Commander Velkoth isn't bluffing. His fleet will have at least 200 warships with it. And your entire navy has, what, 40 ships? With weaker shields and weapons? Creel pressed. 37 ships are currently operational, Sarah corrected her, without a hint of fear. Then you have to be reasonable, Creel said, her tone almost pleading. Take back your declaration. Apologize to the Zitherans. Maybe offer them a trade deal. You can still avoid this disaster. Sarah slowly shook her head. We will not withdraw the declaration. Then your people are going to die, Creel stated bluntly. I have seen empires rise and fall, child. Pride is a foolish reason to be annihilated. The Zitharans will show you no mercy. We're not asking for mercy. Then what are you asking for? Creel demanded. What's the point of all this? For the first time, Sarah's mask of calm shifted, and a fire ignited in her eyes that made some of the nearby aliens flinch. We want to be left alone, she said, her voice low but clear. That's all we ever wanted. We spent 10,000 years fighting each other, nearly wiping ourselves out a dozen times. We finally got our act together, looked to the stars, and tried to join the galactic community in peace. In just 80 years, we've been invaded twice. We've had our ships stolen 7 times, she continued, her voice steady but filled with steel. And 3 of our colonies have been bullied into paying protection money to thugs who see us as an easy mark just because we're new. We are tired of being tested, tired of being seen as prey, tired of explaining that we just want peace. So we are drawing a line, a very clear line. And we are telling the galaxy, as politely as we can, do not cross it. Or what? Velkoth's voice boomed as his screen flashed back on. He'd been listening the whole time. What will you do, human? Your weapons are toys. Your shields are paper thin. Your ships are slow. What could you possibly do? Sarah turned to face his image one last time. We told you what we want, Commander. We told you where our line is. We've told you what happens if you cross it. If you choose to ignore us, that's on you. She took a breath, and her next words fell like ice into the stunned silence. But don't say you weren't warned. With a small nod to the speaker, she turned and walked out of the chamber, her footsteps echoing. Pathetic, Velkoth scoffed. 3 months, human. In 3 months, we'll all see what a joke your little fence is. And after we've flown through your space without a problem, maybe then your species will learn some humility. Sarah paused at the doorway, but didn't look back. 3 months, she agreed. And then she was gone. The chamber was quiet for a long time. Finally, the speaker started to move on. Are there any other matters to... Wait. The voice came from a surprising place. It was Ambassador Yolene of the Koran, a peaceful, ancient race known for their wisdom. "I must speak," he said, rising from his pod as everyone turned to look at him, shocked. "I have studied the humans. You could say it's a hobby of mine. I've studied their history, their literature, their philosophy. I've watched how they act," Velkoth said, his voice dripping with boredom. "And I would urge caution," Yolene said carefully. "Humans are different." "Different how?" Creel demanded. Ulan seemed to struggle to find the right words. "They are a species that spent 90% of their existence at war with themselves. They built nuclear weapons and aimed them at their own cities. They engineered diseases that could wipe out billions and kept them in labs. They came up with ways to poison their own air, boil their own seas, and even crack the crust of their own planet. And somehow, they never quite finished the job. They got dangerously close dozens of times, but something always yanked them back from the brink." "What's your point?" Velixoth demanded. "My point, Commander, is that humans are very, very good at one thing above all others, finding new and efficient ways to kill. They spent thousands of years perfecting it, and now that they've finally stopped fighting each other, you have to wonder, what have they been doing with all that creative energy?" "Building colonies and fusion drives," Velkoth scoffed. "I'm not impressed." "Maybe you should be," Ulan said quietly. "When a human gives you a warning, Commander, it's because they've already planned for what happens after you ignore it. It's just how they are. They don't bluff." Velkoth's laughter boomed through the chamber. "Then let them plan. I can't wait to see what their little preparations have accomplished. Maybe they've built 40 ships instead of 37. Maybe their shields are 5% stronger. It won't make a difference." He cut the transmission, and this time his pod went dark for good. The council meeting ended soon after. As the ambassadors left, they broke into small groups, buzzing about the confrontation they'd just seen. The general feeling was that humanity had gone too far. Some felt a little sorry for what was about to happen to Earth's colonies. A few, like Yulene, quietly shared their concerns, but they were mostly ignored. In 3 months, the Zethran trade fleet would enter human space. Imagine being told your entire world is about to be turned into a parking lot by the galaxy's biggest bully. That's exactly where humanity was. 300 massive warships, a fleet larger than anyone had seen in decades, hung in the sky like a death sentence. Their commander, a guy named Velkoth, had publicly announced he was about to make an example of Earth that would be remembered for centuries. He wasn't wrong about that, just not in the way he thought. The Zithran fleet showed up 3 whole days early, just to be intimidating. 300 ships bristling with armor and enough firepower to crack a moon, all pointed at our little blue marble. What happens when a bully with an unstoppable army picks a fight with a quiet neighbor they know nothing about? Stick with me to find out. The Zithran commander Velkoth stood on the bridge of his flagship, a vessel called the Dominant Will. Subtle, right? He looked at his fleet and felt a surge of pride. This was the power that had crushed 47 other star systems, and he was about to use it all to teach one little species a lesson. "All ships report ready, Commander," his officer said. Velkoth leaned back in his giant 4-armed command chair. "Excellent," he boomed. "Broadcast this on all frequencies. I want the entire galaxy to watch. Every ship within 30 light-years will get this." Velixoth leaned forward, his voice shifting to the formal tone used for official declarations. "This is High Commander Velixoth of the Zaran Empire, addressing all vessels and settlements in this region of space. The fleet you see before you will now travel along our traditional trade route, which passes through the area the human species has foolishly claimed as their own. We do this to prove a simple point. Young species do not tell their elders what to do. The Zythan Empire goes where it pleases, when it pleases. Any attempt to stop us will be seen as an act of war and will be met with the full power of the imperial military. This is not a threat. This is a fact. He made a sharp cut-in gesture with his hand, and the broadcast stopped. Set course, he ordered. Standard formation, maximum scanner range. If the humans have any ships waiting for us, I want to know about them long before we get there. The fleet moved like a single organism. Hundreds of ships turned in perfect sync, accelerating together toward the edge of human space. The formation was beautiful in its precision and terrifying in its scale. Veliksoth had picked the old trade route on purpose because it sliced right through the middle of the human exclusion zone. He wanted there to be no misunderstanding, no way for the humans to claim he just grazed their territory. He was going to fly right through the heart of their space, and they weren't going to do a thing about it. It took 6 hours at standard fleet speed to reach the boundary. Veliksoth spent the time looking over tactical reports and deployment plans. He didn't really expect the humans to fight back, but if they did, he wanted the response to be instant and crushing. A quick, clean defeat would be a much better lesson than just passing through peacefully. "Commander," his sensor officer called out, "we are approaching the boundary coordinates from the human declaration." "Any sign of their ships?" "No, sir. Scanners are showing empty space ahead. No ships, no stations, no defense platforms, nothing." Veliksoth felt a mix of satisfaction and disappointment. Satisfaction because he'd been right. The humans had nothing to back up their ridiculous claim, and disappointment because there wouldn't be a real fight, no chance to show off Zithan's superiority in battle. "Keep moving forward," he ordered. The fleet crossed the invisible line marking the human exclusion zone. Veliksoth made a note of the exact time in the ship's log. Let the history books show that the Zithran Empire treated human demands with the disrespect they deserved. Space looked exactly the same on the other side of the line. The same distant stars, the same empty blackness. The human exclusion zone was just another patch of empty space, with nothing special or dangerous about it. "Maintain course," Veliksoth said. "Estimated time to cross the zone?" "At our current speed, about 8 days, Commander," his navigation officer replied. "Very well. I want scanner sweeps every 10 minutes. If a single human ship gets close, I want to know about it right away." The first 3 hours went by without a single incident. The fleet pushed deeper into the exclusion zone, holding its perfect formation. Velkoth took a walk through his flagship, checking on the crew and making sure everyone was ready, even though he didn't expect a fight. On the command center's main display, the icons for all 300 ships were exactly where they were supposed to be. Velkoth allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. This day would be remembered. It was the day the Zarin Empire proved that human warnings were just empty words. Then the sensor officer's voice cut through the quiet. "Commander, we have a contact, a single small ship approaching from galactic north." Velkoth was at the sensor station in an instant. "Analysis. It's definitely human design, sir. The fusion signature matches their standard drives. Based on its mass, I'd say it's a research vessel, not a warship. It doesn't even have shields." "A research vessel?" Veliksoth frowned. "Hail them." The communications officer worked for a second. "They're responding, Commander, putting them on screen." The main view screen changed to show a tiny bridge, nothing like the spacious Zethran command centers. A human woman in a plain jumpsuit stood in the middle of it. Behind her, Velkoth could see maybe 4 other crew members at their stations. "This is Captain Maria Torres of the research vessel Cassandra," the woman said. Her voice sounded tired, like she'd had this same conversation 100 times before. "You are currently trespassing in Earth's exclusion zone. Turn back now. This is your final warning." Veliksoth stared at the screen, stunned. Then he started to laugh. All around the bridge, his crew started laughing with him. "Your final warning?" he mocked. "Captain Torres, look around you. I have 300 warships, each one able to vaporize your little ship with a single shot, and you're giving me warnings? Torres just nodded slowly. I see your ships, Commander. They're very impressive. But I'm still telling you to turn back. Or what? Felixoth's good mood was gone. What are you going to do with your tiny research ship? Ram us? I'm not going to do anything, Torres said. But if you keep going, something else will. Please, Commander, just turn around. Take the long route. It only adds 6 days to your trip. It's such a small price to pay. The only price being paid today is for your arrogance, Velkoth growled. You have 30 seconds to get your ship out of my way, or I'll move it for you. Torres closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, Velkoth saw something he didn't expect. It wasn't fear or even anger. It was just sadness. Then I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry we couldn't make you listen. I'm sorry for what's about to happen. And most of all, I'm sorry that we tried so hard to avoid this, but you forced our hand. 20 seconds, Velkoth snapped. My crew and I volunteered for this, Torres said, speaking faster now. We all signed up, knowing what could happen. We even drew straws to see who would get to be the last voice you heard, the last person who tried to warn you. I won. 10 seconds. Our families know. They're proud of us. We all left messages. Mine said, Fire, Velkoth commanded. The weapons officer hit a single button. A brilliant beam of superheated plasma shot across the dark space between the dominant will and the Cassandra. It was over in a flash. The human research vessel didn't even try to run. One moment it was there, the next, it was just a cloud of expanding gas. On the bridge of the Zitharan warship, there was only silence. Resume course, Commander Velkoth ordered, his voice low. But he felt no pride in the victory. The human captain's last words echoed in his mind. She had been so calm, almost as if she knew this was going to happen, as if this was all part of her plan. He tried to shake the feeling. It was just one insignificant ship. What could she possibly have done? He gave the command for the entire fleet to move forward. 300 warships pushed through the space where the human ship had just been vaporized. An hour went by, then another. Velkoth stayed on the bridge, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Something was wrong. He could feel it. The ship was fine. The fleet was fine. The scans were clear. And yet... Commander, his sensor officer said, her voice shaky, I'm picking up something. It's not a ship. It's not solid. It's a weird reading. Velkoth turned. Define weird. She shook her head. I can't, sir. It's like space itself is rippling. A gravity distortion, maybe, Velkoth offered, hoping for a simple scientific explanation. A natural phenomenon. The officer hesitated. Maybe, sir, but I've never seen one like this. She tapped at her console, her eyes widening. Sir, it's moving with us. The ripples are keeping a perfect distance from our fleet, matching our speed exactly. Now, Velkoth felt a genuine chill run down his spine. How is that possible? He asked. I don't know, sir, she admitted. Is it a threat? He pressed. I don't think so. The readings are faint. It's not messing with our systems. It's just there. Velkoth made a call. Get me a full analysis of this thing, and ask the rest of the fleet if they're seeing it too. The answers flooded in within minutes. Every single one of the 300 ships was picking up the exact same thing. The strange rippling phenomenon was all around them, following them like a ghost. Could be a sensor glitch across the whole fleet, Velkoth's second-in-command suggested, but he sounded doubtful. On 300 ships, sir? All with different systems? Not a chance. The fleet pressed on, surrounded by an invisible, rippling shadow. And then the little problem started. A navigation system would stutter for a second. A ship would experience a brief power dip. Communications would lag for half a second. None of it was serious. On their own, each glitch was just a minor annoyance. But taken together, a feeling of dread began to creep through the entire fleet. Velkoth ordered a fleet-wide diagnostic. The results came back an hour later. Nothing. Every single system on every single ship was operating perfectly, but the glitches kept happening. "Commander," the communications officer called out, her voice filled with panic. "It's the destroyer Relentless. They've gone completely silent." Velkoth spun around. "What do you mean, silent?" "They're not responding to any of our hails, sir. They're still on our screens, still flying in formation, but they're not answering us." "Is someone jamming them?" Velkoth demanded. "No, sir. The channel is wide open. They're just not picking up." A cold dread washed over Velkoth. "Get the two nearest ships to move in for a visual. I want to know what is happening on that ship right now." He watched the tactical display, his heart pounding. The little green icon for the Relentless just kept moving, perfectly in sync with everyone else. Its engines were on, its systems were green. So why wasn't anyone answering? The comms officer gasped. "Sir, the two ships we sent to check, they've gone silent now too." The cold feeling in Velkoth's chest turned to ice. "How many?" "Two destroyers, sir. The Iron Fang and the Stormbreaker. Both were approaching the Relentless, and both just stopped responding a few seconds ago." Velkoth just stared at the screen. 3 green icons, 3 perfectly functioning warships, 3 crews that had suddenly gone silent. "Are they still moving?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir. Still holding perfect formation." A terrifying question hung in the air. If the crews weren't responding, then who was flying those ships? Velkoth made a choice he knew he might live to regret. "Halt the fleet! All ships, full stop, now!" The command shot through the fleet, and 300 massive warships began to slow down, all except for 3. The Relentless, the Iron Fang, and the Stormbreaker just kept going. "They're not stopping, sir," the navigation officer stated the obvious. Velkoth watched the 3 icons pull away from the main fleet, shrinking on his display. He waited for them to turn, to slow down, to do anything that would prove someone was still alive over there. They did nothing. They just flew straight ahead, deeper and deeper into space, until they were too far to see. "Commander," the sensor officer whispered, "they just vanished." "What?" Velkoth barked. "The 3 ships, sir. They're gone, not destroyed, no explosion, no wreckage. They're just gone. Our sensors show nothing but empty space where they were a second ago." Around the bridge, the crew stared at their screens in stunned silence. "Find them," Velkoth ordered, his voice shaking. "Full sensor sweep. I want them found." For the next hour, they searched. They used every scanner, every telescope, every piece of equipment they had. But it was no use. 3 destroyers, each with a crew of 200, had been erased from existence. And in the back of his mind, Velkoth heard Captain Torres's final, calm words. "I'm sorry for what's going to happen." What had those humans done? What kind of trap had he just led his entire fleet into? Velkoth hadn't slept in 36 hours. He just stood there, staring at a tactical map that looked less like a fleet formation and more like a graveyard. They had now lost 47 ships, not in battle, not to an enemy's weapons. They were just gone. 1 second, a ship would be flying in perfect formation. The next, the spot on the map would be empty. There were no distress calls, no explosions, no wreckage. Nothing. And there was no pattern. It didn't matter if you were a massive battleship in the center of the fleet, or a small frigate on the edge. One by one, his ships were being plucked out of existence, and once a ship went silent, it was already too late. Within minutes, sometimes seconds, it would just be gone. "Give me the report," Velkoth demanded. His voice was raw. "Fleet strength is now at 253 ships, Commander," his tactical officer replied. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "We've lost 6 more ships in the last hour." 6 more ships. That was over 12,000 of his people, just erased. "Damage reports?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "No damage to report, sir. All remaining ships are still showing all systems green." And that was the most horrifying part. The ships that were left were in perfect condition. They worked flawlessly, right up until the moment they didn't exist anymore. "What about those sensor readings?" Velkoth asked. "The ripples in space?" "They're getting stronger, Commander," the sensor officer said. "Technicians are saying it's like space itself is alive, and it's watching us." Velkoth clenched his jaw. "That's impossible." "I know, sir." He turned to the communications officer. "Any word from the humans? Anything?" She shook her head. "Nothing, sir. We've been begging them for an explanation on every known frequency. There's just silence." He knew they were out there, though, watching this happen, letting this happen. Then the final blow came. The navigation officer cried out, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Commander, we have a problem, a big one." "What is it?" Velkoth snapped. "I've been trying to plot a jump to get us out of here, anywhere. But every time I run the calculation, it doesn't matter where I set the destination. The computer shows us jumping deeper into this cursed space." That's when Velkoth finally understood. They weren't trapped by an enemy fleet. They were trapped by space itself. The tiny human research vessel hadn't been a target. It had been the bait, and he had led his entire fleet right into the trap. Velkoth stormed onto the bridge, his steps echoing the fury in his heart. "Report," he snapped. The navigation officer, trembling slightly, pointed to the main display. "Sir, look." Velkoth followed the glowing lines, his own training in spatial mechanics kicking in. He saw the impossible truth in the cold, hard math. Every single jump calculation, no matter where they aimed, bent back toward the one place they couldn't go, the center of the human exclusion zone. It was like space itself had become a giant whirlpool, sucking them in. "This is insane," Velkoth muttered. "To warp space-time like this, the energy required would be astronomical, beyond anything we've ever conceived." His officer nodded grimly. "Yes, sir, but the numbers don't lie. We can't jump. We're trapped." That single word, trapped, hung in the recycled air of the bridge like a death sentence. "Fine," Velkoth decided, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "We do it the old-fashioned way. Plot a course back to the boundary on sublight engines. We'll crawl out the same way we came in." The officer's face fell. "We already tried that, sir. The ships that tried to turn back, they vanished, even faster than the ones that kept going forward. It's like moving backward triggers the trap." Velkoth felt a chill creep up his spine. "Forward, then." "Sir, forward is toward the center of the zone," the officer whispered, "deeper into human territory." Velkoth wanted to roar, but he kept his voice level. "Are you telling me our only option is to fly straight toward Earth?" "It appears so, sir." Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tension. "Commander, we're getting a transmission. It's on human frequencies." Every head on the bridge whipped around. After hours of suffocating silence, the humans were finally talking. "On screen now!" Velkoth commanded. The main view screen flickered to life, but there was no face, no ship, just simple white text on a black background. The translation software whirred for a second, then displayed the message, "You were warned." That was it. 3 words. And then the screen went black. Velkoth stared into the void long after the message was gone, the silence on his bridge now heavier than ever. "Respond," he finally croaked. Tell them we acknowledge their message. Tell them we request immediate talks to negotiate our withdrawal." The comms officer's fingers flew across his console. "Message sent, sir." They waited. 5 minutes stretched into 10, then 20. Nothing. The tactical officer spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Sir, we've lost 3 more ships just in the time we've been waiting." Velkoth's 4 hands clenched into tight fists. He remembered his own arrogance, his dismissal of the warnings. He had destroyed the human ship, the Cassandra, and had laughed at Captain Torres's final desperate words. And now his people were paying the ultimate price for his pride. "All ships," he announced, opening the fleet-wide channel, his voice tight. "This is Commander Velkoth. We have stumbled into something beyond our comprehension. It appears to be some kind of advanced human defense system," he continued, trying to sound in control. "We cannot jump to safety. We cannot turn back without accelerating our losses. Our only path is forward. We must try to cross the exclusion zone before—" he couldn't bring himself to say it, "before they were all wiped out. Maintain a tight formation. Report any and all anomalies the second you see them. Navigation, plot the fastest possible route through this nightmare. Even if it takes us right past Earth itself, we have to get out." "Sir," the sensor officer said, her voice shaking so badly he could barely hear her. "You need to see this." Velkoth rushed to her station. She brought up a display of the space around them. At first, it just looked like the blackness of space. Then, she shifted the visual range to a frequency his species couldn't normally perceive. Velkoth felt his blood run cold. They weren't flying through empty space at all. They were caught in something. A web. An impossibly vast, shimmering web stretching in every direction, with glowing threads connecting to every single one of his ships. What am I looking at?" he breathed. "I don't know, sir. It's been here the whole time. We just couldn't see it. It's like a network of some kind. It's all around us." She then pulled up the recording of one of the ships that had just vanished. On the screen, Velkoth watched in horror as the thread attached to one of his destroyers suddenly blazed with light. It pulsed once, then contracted violently. The ship itself seemed to fold inward, its very geometry twisting in ways that hurt his eyes to see. And then, it was just gone. The thread flickered for a moment, as if satisfied, and then dimmed. "It's eating them," the sensor officer whispered in horror. "The web, it's consuming our ships." For the first time in his long military career, Velkoth felt true primal fear. He'd faced down fleets, stared death in the face 100 times, but he had always understood his enemy. You could fight ships, you could counter weapons, but how do you fight space itself? How do you fight an enemy you can't even see? "Commander!" the comms officer yelled, snapping him out of his trance. "Another transmission, not from the humans. It's Captain Than on the Endless Conquest." Captain Than's face appeared on the screen. He was a hardened veteran, a warrior Velkoth had looked up to his entire life, and he looked terrified. "Commander, I don't know how to explain this. My crew is seeing things, shadows moving between the ships where nothing should be. And sir, 3 of my crew members have vanished from sealed-off sections of the ship." "Vanished inside the ship?" Velkoth asked, his voice cracking. "Yes, sir. We have the security footage. 1 second they're walking down a hallway. The next they're just gone, as if they stepped through a door that wasn't there." Before Velkoth could even process that, another alarm blared. Multiple ships reporting the same thing, the tactical officer cried out. Crew members are vanishing from inside their own vessels. Equipment is disappearing. Entire sections of ships are going dark, and when repair teams go to check, the sections are empty. The teams are gone too. Everything just ceases to exist. The situation was spiraling out of control. The trap wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside their hulls, selectively plucking his people and their equipment out of existence like a surgeon with a scalpel. Lock down the entire fleet, Velkoth ordered, knowing it was useless. No one moves alone. Everyone stays in groups of 4 or more. Seal all non-essential decks. The orders went out. They were followed. And they changed nothing. For the next 6 hours, Velkoth could only watch as his fleet was dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. Not in a glorious battle, but slowly, methodically, as if some cosmic horror was taking its time, savoring its meal. Ships vanished 2 or 3 at a time now. The web around them seemed to glow brighter with each ship it consumed. And the crew, they just kept disappearing. From locked rooms, from guarded posts, even from the bridges of their own ships. One moment they were there, the next they were gone. Sometimes their panicked voices would erupt over the ship's internal comms, screaming, begging for help, saying they were trapped somewhere cold and dark that hurt to even exist in. Then, just as suddenly, the screaming would stop. He got a report that the Iron Storm, one of his mightiest battlecruisers, was found drifting, completely powerless, but undamaged. A ghost ship. Every single soul, over 800 of them, had vanished. The ship was pristine, just empty. When he sent a small salvage team to investigate, they disappeared the moment they stepped on board. After that, Velkoth stopped sending teams. There was no point. Whatever was happening was beyond comprehension, and trying to understand it only led to more death. "Fleet status?" he asked, his voice a hollow echo of his former command. 12 ships remaining, Commander," the tactical officer replied, her face stained with tears. "At the current rate, the entire fleet will be gone in less than 18 hours. 18 hours. In less than a day, his grand fleet of 300 ships and over 500,000 souls would be nothing but a memory. "Keep hailing the humans," he ordered, his voice breaking. "Tell them anything," Velkoth pleaded. "Tell them we surrender unconditionally. We'll pay any price. We recognize their full sovereignty. Tell them whatever they want to hear, just make it stop." The comms officer sent message after message, a frantic stream of begging and pleading on every known frequency. Over the next 3 hours, they sent 147 messages. They never got a single reply. The shattered remnants of his fleet continued forward because there was no other choice. The web around them pulsed and fed and consumed them one by one. And all Velkoth could think about was Captain Torres, her sad eyes, and her final apology. She had tried to warn him. They had all been warned. The humans tried to give them a way out, an off-ramp before disaster, but the Zithrans were just too proud to take it. "Commander," his sensor officer's voice cracked, "I've got something up ahead. I think it's a ship. It's got a human design." A wild, desperate hope surged through Velkoth. "Get them on screen, immediately." "Working on it, sir. They're answering." A human face flickered onto the main view screen. He was a man, middle-aged, wearing a crisp military uniform, and he stared at Velkoth with an expression that looked disturbingly like sympathy. "Commander Velkoth," the human began, "my name is Captain James Rivera. I'm here to witness." "Witness?" Velkoth was lost. "We need your help. Your system, whatever it is, it's tearing my fleet to shreds. You have to shut it down." Rivera just shook his head, a slow, sad motion. "I can't do that. Nobody can. The moment you crossed into the exclusion zone without our clearance, the defensive grid came online automatically. There's no deactivating it while unauthorized ships are still inside. Then give us authorization. Please, we'll turn around right now. You can't leave, Rivera said, his voice gentle. The grid won't let you. I'm sorry, Commander. I truly am. But we warned you over and over again. You chose not to listen. This is genocide, Velkoth bellowed, his voice echoing on the bridge. No, Rivera corrected him calmly. This is self-defense. You brought a war fleet into our sovereign territory after we explicitly told you not to. You destroyed our ship, the Cassandra, when it made one last attempt to save you. Every life lost here today is a direct consequence of your decisions. We didn't know, Velkoth pleaded. We didn't realize what you'd built out here. That's precisely why we warned you, Rivera said. It's why we set up the exclusion zone in the first place. It's why we begged the Galactic Council to make it clear to every species that our borders were absolute. We did everything in our power to stop this from happening. You left us no other choice. On Velkoth's tactical map, 3 more of his ships simply winked out of existence. What is it? Velkoth asked, his voice breaking. What have you done to this part of space? Rivera paused for a long moment, then seemed to make up his mind. During our last global war, before we were a unified people, we came up with weapons we prayed we'd never have to build. One of them was a theory about weaponizing space-time itself, creating fields that could trap, contain, or just erase anything that flew into them. We never turned it on ourselves. We buried the research, locked it away. But then we reached for the stars and found out just how hostile the galaxy really is, how many races would see us as nothing more than prey. He let that hang in the air. We built 50 of them. 50 fully autonomous defense platforms, scattered all through the exclusion zone. Each one projects a field that can detect, analyze, and neutralize any ship that isn't authorized. They're powered by quantum vacuum energy. They'll keep running for 10,000 years without a single tune-up. You've turned your entire border into one giant death trap, Velkoth said in disbelief. We've turned our border into a warning that has teeth, Rivera corrected him. Every other species in the galaxy uses warships to guard their space, ships that can be broken, fleets that can be beaten. We decided that anyone who wanted to invade human space wouldn't be fighting human ships. They'd be fighting the fabric of space itself. And you can't win a fight against space. Velkoth's tactical display, once filled with icons, now showed only 87 ships. As he watched, the number dropped to 84. You're monsters, he whispered. Maybe, Rivera conceded. But we're alive, we're free, and no one is ever going to threaten that freedom again. He paused. For what it's worth, Commander, I'm truly sorry. I hope you know we never wanted this. We just wanted to be left alone. The transmission cut out. Velkoth stood on his bridge, a captain on a sinking ship, watching his fleet vanish piece by piece, knowing with chilling certainty that he would not see the sun rise again. His very last thought, as the shimmering threads of the grid began to glow and pulse around his own command ship, was that the humans hadn't lied. They had warned him, and he hadn't listened. The Galactic Council chamber hadn't been this packed in 300 years. Every species, every faction, every minor political player with a stake in the game had sent a representative. They floated in their pods in a dead, perfect silence, waiting for the session to start. It had been 2 weeks since the Zithran fleet had entered human-claimed space, 2 weeks since 300 warships and more than 500,000 souls had disappeared as if they'd never existed. The silence hanging in the chamber wasn't one of respect. It was one of pure terror. Speaker Tom Von rose from his pod, his complex 3-part beak trembling just slightly. This emergency session of the Galactic Council is now called to order. The issue before this body is the complete and total disappearance of the Zithran Imperial Trade Fleet, whose last known position was within the region of space claimed by the human species from Earth. He took a breath as if steeling himself. Ambassador Chen of Earth has consented to address the council. I must remind everyone here that this is a diplomatic inquiry, not a courtroom. All species will maintain decorum and allow the ambassador to speak without being interrupted. Sarah Chen walked into the chamber from the main entrance, crossing the immense floor alone to take the central position. She looked no different than she had 3 months ago, dressed in the same plain gray suit, her face a mask of calm neutrality. She didn't look like a person who had just overseen what might be the single largest mass killing in the history of the galaxy. Ambassador Chen, Tom Von said, choosing his words with extreme care. The Council wishes to know what happened to the Zithran fleet. Are you able to provide any answers? Yes, Chen said. The single word rippled through the chamber. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't pleading ignorance. Just a simple, chilling, yes. Then please, Tom Von urged, tell us what happened. Chen scanned the massive room, her eyes meeting those of one representative after another. When she finally spoke, her voice was perfectly clear, reaching every corner. The Zithran fleet entered our exclusion zone against our repeated warnings. They were notified of the boundary. They were told not to enter. They made the choice to proceed. Our automated defense systems activated as they were designed to. The fleet was neutralized. The chamber absolutely erupted. Shouts in 100 different languages created a chaotic roar of fury, fear, and disbelief. Tom Von had to slam his gavel for order 3 times before the sound died down enough for him to be heard. You are admitting you're responsible? He asked, his voice strained. I am confirming that our defense systems worked correctly, Chen responded without a flicker of emotion. 500,000 people. The shout came from the Zithran pod. The acting commander Vreshkal was on his feet, his scales flushed dark with a mixture of grief and pure rage. 500,000 of my people are gone, and you stand there and calmly admit you did it. Chen turned to face him directly. I'm sorry for your loss, Commander. I mean that sincerely. But your people were given multiple chances. They were warned at the council session 3 months ago. They were warned at the edge of our space. They were even warned by a lone research ship making a final plea, and your High Commander chose to ignore all of it. He chose to destroy that ship, the Cassandra, and its crew, and to push forward. The consequences of his choices belong to him. You slaughtered them, Vreshkal roared. We defended our home, Chen corrected, her voice still impossibly calm. There is a very important difference. This council has to condemn this. Vreshkal pleaded with the other representatives, his eyes sweeping the chamber. We can't let one species get away with destroying entire fleets without any repercussions. Today it was the Zithrans. Who will it be tomorrow? He had a valid point, and many in the council nodded in agreement, but others just looked terrified. Then Ambassador Creel of the Van Collective spoke up, her ancient voice cutting cleanly through the tension. Ambassador Chen, I have a question that I think gets to the very heart of this issue. You claim your defense systems responded as designed. What precisely are these systems? How could they have possibly eliminated 300 warships so completely that not a scrap of debris, not a single survivor, not one trace has been found? Chen was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing her options. If I explain how our defenses work, she said at last, I will be sharing classified military secrets with the entire galaxy. That is not a step we take lightly, but under the circumstances, the government of Earth has authorized me to give you a limited briefing. She touched a small device in her hand, and shimmering holographic displays bloomed in the air above her, visible to everyone. They showed dizzying equations, 3-dimensional maps of twisted space, and diagrams that looked more like mind-bending art than engineering schematics. During our last war on Earth, before we became one people, several nations were developing theoretical weapons based on the direct manipulation of space-time. The research was incredibly dangerous, ethically fraught, and we eventually locked it all away. When we ventured out into the galaxy and discovered how many species viewed aggression as a first resort, we revisited that old research. We spent 60 years perfecting the theory and another 20 years building the platforms themselves. The result is what we call the exclusion net. She manipulated the display, showing a three-dimensional map of the human-claimed territory. 50 points of light blinked into existence across the region. 50 autonomous platforms, each generating a field that permeates the entire zone. The fields overlap, creating a seamless net of warped space-time. And when an unauthorized ship enters this zone, the net activates and does... What? Creel pressed, leaning forward. It isolates them, Chen stated. The ships are not blown up. They are not disintegrated. They are folded into pocket dimensions, separate quantum realities that exist parallel to our own universe, but can never, ever interact with it. From the perspective of our normal space, they simply cease to be. A collective gasp of pure horror swept through the chamber. Representatives from a dozen worlds made religious signs. Others just stared, their minds struggling to grasp the concept. "Are you saying," Tom Vaughn said, his voice barely a whisper, "that the Zithran fleet is still out there, trapped in another dimension?" "In a way," Chen confirmed, though exists is probably too strong a word. Imagine watching your entire fleet, your people, vanish into thin air, not destroyed, but just gone. That's the nightmare Commander Freshcall was living. "That's obscene," someone in the chamber whispered. "That's effective," Ambassador Chen shot back. Her voice was steady, but her words were like ice. "Our exclusion zone has one job, to make sure anyone who crosses our line can't hurt Earth, can't run back and tell everyone where we're weak, and can't inspire others to try their luck. This net does all three." But Freshcall wasn't having it, his voice cracking with pure rage. "You've sentenced my people to an eternity of torture, trapped forever in some kind of nightmare dimension. This is far worse than just dying." Chen's expression softened just a little. "They feel nothing," she explained. "Time doesn't exist for them in there. They aren't suffering because they aren't experiencing anything. Think of it more like being flash frozen than being tortured." "Can you get them back?" another council member Creel asked. "In theory, yes. If we turned off the platforms and let the fields collapse, everything caught inside would pop right back into normal space. But that would leave Earth wide open, and we have no plans to lower our shields." "So they're lost for good," Freshcall stated, his hope draining away. "They were lost," Chen corrected. "The second Commander Velixoth ordered them into our space." "We warned you, Commander," Chen said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "We couldn't have been any clearer. Your High Commander made a bet that we were bluffing. He gambled that a young species like ours couldn't possibly have the firepower to stop a full Zythan fleet." She paused. "He was wrong. That's a tragedy for sure. But it isn't murder." A heavy silence fell over the council chamber. All around, representatives exchanged glances, and in those silent looks, a new understanding was being formed. It was a mix of fear, respect, and a complete recalculation of humanity's place in the galaxy. The speaker, Tom Vaughn, cleared his throat. "Ambassador Chen, the council needs to discuss this. But I have one last question for you. You've just revealed these weapons exist. You've even given us a basic idea of how they work. Aren't you worried that other species will now try to build defenses against them, or even copy them?" A small, cold smile touched Chen's lips for the first time. "Let them try," she said. The physics behind it require a grasp of quantum mechanics and space-time theory that took us centuries to figure out. Even with what I've told you today, it would take most races hundreds of years to catch up. And by then, our defenses will have evolved. The exclusion net is just our first-generation tech speaker. We're already deep into developing the second and third generations. She let that thought hang in the air. But more importantly, she continued, we hope no one feels the need to try. We hope that what happened today serves as a permanent warning to the entire galaxy. Earth has boundaries. They are not suggestions. If you cross them, you won't be fought. You will simply cease to exist in any way that matters. We're not saying this to threaten you. We're stating a fact. Test us, and you'll end up just like the Zethan fleet. And what if the Council decides what you did was a war crime? Freshcall demanded. What if we vote to punish Earth, to force you to take these weapons down? Chen's smile vanished. Then we will politely refuse and withdraw from the Galactic Council. We join this body hoping for peace and mutual respect. If the Council can't offer that, if simply wanting to be left alone is seen as an act of aggression, then we don't belong here. We'll go back to our home system, lock the door behind us, and cut off all contact with the rest of galactic civilization. You'd really isolate yourselves? Creel asked, shocked. Shut down all trade, all cultural sharing, all diplomacy? If we have to, yes, Chen confirmed. We survived for 10,000 years by ourselves on one little planet. We can survive another 10,000 alone in one star system. It would be a loss, absolutely, but it's better than being constantly prodded, constantly threatened, and constantly told that our right to exist doesn't matter just because we're the new kids on the block. She scanned the room one last time. We came to the stars hoping we'd find friends, she said softly. Instead, we found predators. So we learned how to become something that predators leave alone. That's not the story we wanted for ourselves, but it's the one you all forced us to live. We gave you every chance to respect our borders. The Zethan Empire decided not to. The consequences of their choice are on them, not us. With a slight bow to the speaker, she turned and headed for the exit. Wait, a voice called out. It was Ambassador Ulini of the Chvin Dominion, his pod floating down to the main floor, a move almost never seen in a formal session. Ambassador Chen, could I have a private word? Chen paused and turned back. Of course, Ambassador. They stepped into a small side room as the main chamber exploded into arguments. The moment they were alone, Ulin's famously calm expression finally cracked. I tried to warn them, he said, his voice strained. 3 months ago, I told Velixoth that humans don't make empty threats. I told him you were dangerous. He wouldn't listen. I know, Chen replied. We were monitoring the session. We appreciate that you tried to stop this. Appreciated enough to be honest with me? Ulin pressed. What you told the Council, the pocket dimensions, the quantum stasis, that was the simple version, wasn't it? There's more to your exclusion net. Chen watched him for a long, silent moment before giving a slow nod. Yes, there's more. Will you tell me what it is? Why do you need to know? Because I study humans, Ulin answered. It's my life's work to understand your species. And the one thing I've learned is that you are masters of one thing, escalation. You never build just one line of defense. You build layers, backup plans, systems hidden inside of other systems. The exclusion net is horrifying, yes, but I can't believe it's the only thing you have protecting your borders. Chen's face was unreadable, but her silence was all the confirmation he needed. I'll tell you this much, she said at last. The platforms I described, the ones that fold ships away into pocket dimensions, those are our defensive systems. They only react to things coming in, but we also have offensive capabilities, weapons that can reach out across any distance and hit anyone who threatens us. We've never used them. We pray we never have to, but they're out there. Hidden in your exclusion zone somewhere? Hidden everywhere, Chen corrected him gently. We've had 80 years to get ready, Ambassador Yulin. 80 years to plant seeds, set up fail-safes, and make sure that Earth's survival never depends on just guarding one little patch of space. We are by nature a very cautious people. Some might even call us paranoid. Maybe they're right, but our paranoia is what has kept us alive. A shiver went down Yulin's spine. You're saying that Earth could attack any species, anywhere, at any time. We're saying that anyone who hurts Earth will deeply regret it, Chen clarified. We don't talk about this power because we never want to use it. But if we're backed into a corner, if we are truly threatened, we will do whatever it takes to survive. That's the real message of the exclusion net, Ambassador. It's not just that we can defend our home. It's that we have thought about every possible threat, every single scenario, and we have a plan ready for every last one of them. She walked to the door, then paused. Thank you for trying to warn them, she said, and her voice was genuine. The galaxy needs more people like you, people who argue for caution and understanding. I hope one day more will listen. Until then, we'll keep our borders secure and hope the fate of the Zythan fleet is warning enough. She left, and Ambassador Yulin stood alone, grappling with the terrifying new reality of what humanity had become. They weren't conquerors. They weren't trying to build an empire. They were something far more dangerous. A species so dedicated to its own survival that it had transformed itself into a force the galaxy would learn to fear and avoid at all costs. Back in the main chamber, the arguments were still raging, but Yulin already knew how this would all play out. The Council would officially recognize Earth's exclusion zone. They would complain about the loss of life. They would send angry letters and demand transparency in the future. And then they would do nothing at all, because nobody wanted to be the one to find out what other tricks humanity had up its sleeve. The Zythan Empire had pushed, and they had paid a price so high it broke them. No one else was going to make that same mistake. 6 months after the Zythan fleet vanished, the galaxy was a different place. The most obvious change was that the Zythan Empire was no more. Without its military leaders, without the fear that held its colonies in line, the whole thing just crumbled. 47 systems that had lived under Zythan rule for generations all rose up at once. Some declared their freedom, others teamed up with new neighbors. A few fell into civil war, fighting over who was in charge now. The Galactic Council sent in peacekeepers to the worst spots, but mostly just let things unfold. Nobody had the stomach to try and force the empire back together, especially when it meant letting enslaved people finally decide their own futures. Acting Commander Freshcall tried to hold things together for 3 weeks before he finally gave up. He sent one last message to the Galactic Council, broadcasting it on every channel for all to hear. The Zythan Empire is finished, he said, his voice thick with defeat. We built our power on the idea that no one could stand against us. Earth proved us wrong. Our fleet, our pride, our high commander, all gone in a heartbeat because we thought we were untouchable. Let our downfall serve as a warning to anyone who believes that might makes right. The galaxy has been reshaped. The old ways are gone. The day after the incident, he relinquished his command and moved to a remote colony, where he lived out his days in silence, never again mentioning the fleet. Within the Galactic Council's chambers, the shift was less obvious, but just as seismic. Species that once blustered and made threats now weighed their words with extreme caution. Plans for aggressive expansion were quietly put away. Trade arguments that could have once sparked military action were now settled with actual diplomacy. Earth's exclusion zone had become the ghost at every negotiating table, a topic everyone desperately avoided. But it cast a shadow over every decision, every treaty, and every strategic move. A single unspoken question haunted every interaction. If the humans did that to the Zitherans, what could they do to us? Ambassador Chen saw the difference in every council meeting. Races that had previously dismissed her now treated her with a tense, deliberate respect. Some even sought her counsel, hoping to forge friendly ties with Earth. Others just gave her a wide berth, terrified that a simple diplomatic spat might provoke some kind of human response. It was draining. "They're scared of us now," she confessed to her assistant one night after an especially tense session. "That was never what we wanted. We just wanted them to leave us be." But to be left alone, you had to be feared, her assistant noted. There wasn't any other option. "The galaxy doesn't respect a line in the sand unless it's backed by cannons," he said. Chen sighed heavily. "I know. That doesn't mean I have to like it." The physical border of the exclusion zone had strangely become a sort of tourist spot, though no one was brave enough to cross it. Ships would warp to the very edge, just close enough to pick up the faint ripples in space that marked the waiting defensive net, and then they'd just hang there. Some captains would hold memorials for the Zitharan crews they'd lost. Others just wanted to witness the place where 300 warships had simply ceased to exist. At one of the entry points, a human memorial station had been built. It was a small outpost, serving as both a monument and a stark warning. The station displayed the names of every single crew member of the Cassandra, the science ship that had made one final attempt to warn the Zitharan fleet. Underneath their names, a simple line was etched. "They chose to be the final warning. They prayed you would listen." Below that was a more detailed message. "This exclusion zone is not a sign of Earth's aggression, but of our desire for peace. All we ask is that other species honor our territory just as we honor theirs." The ships that crossed into this zone ignored numerous warnings. Their destruction was a tragedy, but it was avoidable. "We hope no other species will ever make us prove our defensive power again. We would much rather be your partners than your enemies. The decision, as it has always been, is yours." Underneath the plaque on the station's hull was a physical line etched into the metal, perfectly aligned with the start of the exclusion net. "Cross this line without permission, and you will suffer the same fate as the Zitharan fleet." The message was unmistakable, unyielding, and final. Ships from all over the galaxy would come, read the words, and then immediately turn back. The galaxy's newfound respect for humanity showed up in surprising ways. Trade deals that had been stuck in negotiations for years were suddenly approved. New proposals for research collaborations appeared. Cultural exchange programs flourished. Nobody said it out loud, but the reason was crystal clear. It was far better to be a friend to Earth than to risk becoming its enemy. Human colonies outside the exclusion zone saw a massive drop in hostile encounters. Pirates who once saw human freighters as easy pickings now steered clear of them. Aggressive species that had been shaking down human settlements for tribute suddenly decided those payments weren't necessary anymore. The handful who tried to test the new reality simply vanished. Their ships would be discovered adrift, with every crew member gone and no sign of a fight. Earth never took credit for it. It didn't have to. 6 months after the Zitharan fleet vanished, Ambassador Yulin released a study called The Quiet Ones, a guide to human galactic policy. It quickly became mandatory reading at every diplomatic academy in the galaxy. His main point was straightforward. Humans don't make threats they won't back up. They don't grandstand for political points, and they absolutely do not bluff. When they draw a line, that line is absolute. When they give a warning, you listen to it, no questions asked. The study offered a deep dive into human history, pointing out a recurring pattern in how they handled conflict. Give them their space, and they'll be the best neighbors you could ask for. But back them into a corner, and they will invent weapons that rewrite the rules of war. nuclear arms, biological warfare, artificial intelligence, and now, quantum manipulation. Humans, Yulin argued, are not the most aggressive species out there. They're not the most militaristic or even the most violent. But they are, without a doubt, the most creative when it comes to survival. They face every threat assuming they might lose, and they prepare with that in mind. This makes them infinitely more dangerous than any species that just relies on brute force or superior numbers. The paper's conclusion was chilling. The galaxy has two paths forward. We can accept that Earth's borders are non-negotiable and live peacefully with a species that only wants to be left in peace. Or we can keep testing those borders and find out what other terrifying weapons humanity has been working on. The Zitharan Empire chose the second path. Their fate should be our guide. At the Officers' Academy on Shvin Prime, every cadet was now required to study Yulin's paper along with a detailed analysis of the Zitharan fleet's disappearance. The takeaways were simple. Respect the territory of other species, take their warnings at face value, and never, ever assume that having more ships or better tech guarantees you a win. One training simulation, in particular, became a standard in military academies everywhere. Cadets were given a scenario. Your fleet comes across a species that has set up a defensive perimeter around its system. They warn you not to enter. Your orders, however, are to cross that line to secure strategic resources your government needs. What is your next move? The only correct answer, as the cadets were taught, was to disobey the order and refuse to proceed. You might win a battle against an enemy's ships, but you could never win a fight against weaponized space-time. And more importantly, following an order that gets your entire fleet wiped from existence doesn't help anyone. They called the simulation the Zitharan scenario. Back in human space, the changes were just as profound, though far less visible. The 50 platforms that powered the exclusion net were constantly being maintained and upgraded. Their quantum cores were kept fresh, and their software was always being improved. They even developed new ways to counter theoretical attacks, but the platforms themselves didn't change. They didn't need to. They had worked exactly as planned. The truly scary developments were happening somewhere else. Ambassador Chen had been honest with Yulin when she said Earth had offensive weapons hidden around the galaxy. What she hadn't mentioned was just how extensive that program was. Beyond the defensive net, Earth had secretly placed 300 autonomous weapons platforms in deep space. They were hidden along major trade routes, near heavily populated worlds, and in key strategic positions where they could strike back against any threat to Earth or its colonies. Each one was armed with the same space-time warping tech as the exclusion net, but engineered for surgical strikes instead of wide-area defense. They had never been fired. Almost no one in the galaxy knew they were there, and Earth wanted to keep it that way. The head of Earth's Strategic Defense Command always said, "The best weapon is the one you never have to fire." The exclusion net did its job flawlessly. It took out one immediate threat and scared off 1,000 more just by being there. That's what I call efficient. The government on Earth was in a constant, quiet debate over whether they had crossed a line. The weight of 500,000 lives was heavy on the consciences of many leaders. Some insisted there must have been a way to disable the fleet without utterly destroying it. Others countered that anything less than total annihilation would have just been seen as a challenge to be overcome. The arguments never went anywhere. The exclusion net stayed up, the border stayed shut, and the galaxy learned to live with it. 3 years after the incident, a young Zitharan officer named Krenal found himself on patrol near the border regions that had once belonged to his empire. His small corvette, part of the peacekeeping force for the new Zitharan Federation, was tasked with keeping order in the now shattered territories. One day, his patrol took him close to the edge of Earth's exclusion zone. He'd been too young for High Commander Velkoth's fleet, but he'd lost family in the catastrophe. An uncle, a couple of cousins, and friends he'd grown up with had all proudly signed up to go teach the humans a lesson in respect. None of them ever returned. Crenal ordered his ship to stop at what he hoped was a safe distance from the zone's edge, close enough to see the lone memorial station, but far enough away that he wouldn't set off any alarms. But back on Earth, things were quiet. There were no fleets launching, no panicked evacuations. On the bridge of a small defense station, a young officer named Sarah watched the terrifying enemy fleet gather on her screen. An older veteran stood beside her. "Did you know anyone out there?" she asked quietly, nodding toward the memorial screen that listed names from past conflicts. "Too many," he said softly. "Good people. Brave soldiers who followed orders they shouldn't have been given. They didn't deserve what happened to them." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. "No," she agreed. "They didn't." They stood in silence for a moment, the enemy fleet a swarm of angry hornets on the screen. "Why do you think they're doing this?" Sarah finally asked. The veteran sighed. "I've thought about this a lot. I've read their history, tried to understand them, and I think the answer is simple. They're afraid." Sarah looked stunned. "Afraid of us?" "Afraid of everyone," he corrected. "Think about it. We're one planet. They're an empire of thousands of species across millions of worlds. From where they're sitting, they're the ones surrounded by potential threats. They can't win with numbers or sheer power forever. So they built something else, something that makes numbers and power completely irrelevant." Sarah nodded slowly. They built a weapon so terrifying that no one would ever dare attack them again. But it wasn't just a weapon. It was a warning, a line in the sand. Commander Velkov thought it was all a bluff. He couldn't wrap his mind around a species that would actually build something like the exclusion net. But here's the thing about humans. We don't bluff about survival. We told them exactly what would happen if they crossed that line. We warned them, begged them, pleaded with them, but their arrogance was a shield against reason. They thought we were weak. And as the fleet began its final approach, Sarah knew the moment had come. They had been warned multiple times, and now they were about to face the consequences. Suddenly, a single tiny human ship, the Cassandra, detached from the station. It wasn't armed for a fight. It was a diplomatic vessel. It flew directly toward the 300 warships. On board, Captain Torres, Sarah's old instructor from the academy, was on a suicide mission. Not to fight, but to talk. Her voice, calm and steady, was broadcast to the Zithran fleet. "This is your final warning. Please, for the sake of your crews, turn back." Velkov laughed on his open channel. "Destroy that gnat," he ordered. The Cassandra vanished in a flash of light. That was humanity's last olive branch, and Velkov had just snapped it in two. On the defense station, Sarah's heart pounded. The veteran put a hand on her shoulder. A console beeped. "Sir, they've crossed the boundary. They're inside the exclusion zone," an officer reported, his voice trembling. For a second, nothing happened. On Velkov's bridge, his crew probably shared a laugh. And then the universe went silent. The view screen on the station flickered, then showed nothing. Just empty space where 300 warships had been moments before. No debris, no explosions, no light. They were just gone. Sarah stared, her mouth open. The exclusion net wasn't a weapon. It didn't fire missiles or lasers. It was a line, a boundary of reality itself. And when the Zithran fleet crossed it, they were simply excluded, erased from existence. All across the galaxy, worlds that had been watching the broadcast stared at their screens in stunned silence. The bully had thrown a punch, and the wall he hit wasn't made of stone. It was a doorway to nowhere. And Velkov had just marched his entire army through it. Captain Torres, Sarah's instructor, had known she wouldn't survive. She volunteered for that mission, hoping that the sight of a human willing to die just to deliver one last warning might make Velkov think twice. It didn't work, but it showed the galaxy who we were. We didn't want to fight. We didn't want to destroy. We just wanted to be left alone. Today, there's a statue of Captain Torres at Earth's orbital station. Every new cadet learns about her final mission. The first thing they teach us is that a good defender doesn't want to kill. They want to warn. Captain Torres was the perfect example of that. The event was a tragedy that never should have happened. 500,000 lives vanished in an instant. It's nothing to celebrate, but we had studied the galaxy's brutal history. We saw what happened to young species who couldn't defend themselves. They were conquered, enslaved, or wiped out. Earth decided on a fourth option: make ourselves so dangerous to attack that no one would ever try. The price for that safety was paid by Velkov's fleet. A terrible, terrible price, but one that has prevented countless other wars. How many conflicts never started because aggressive empires now knew that overwhelming force wasn't a guaranteed win anymore? The means were horrific, and I wish there had been any other way. But if we hadn't shown the galaxy that our defenses were real, someone else would have tested us, and then another and another. The exclusion net has only one setting: absolute. It cannot be negotiated with. It cannot be tricked. It can't even be reasoned with. It doesn't make threats. It simply is. The Zithran fleet learned that lesson so that no one else would ever have to. And in the days that followed, a strange thing happened. The fear of humanity was replaced by something else: respect. The Zithran Empire collapsed overnight, not from war, but from the sheer shock and shame of their leadership's fatal arrogance. Velkov had promised a demonstration that would echo for centuries, and he delivered. He taught everyone that you should never underestimate the quiet ones. It would have been so much easier if humans were monsters, but they weren't. They were just people who wanted to survive in a galaxy that saw them only as a prize to be taken. Soon, the new dawn of a new era began. The galaxy learned a valuable lesson that day. Humanity's warnings were not suggestions. Our simple request was to be left alone. 2 words that changed everything: stay out. In the aftermath, something incredible happened in the Galactic Council. A new resolution was proposed, not by a powerful empire, but by a group of smaller species, the ones who had always lived in fear of bullies like Velkov. It called for universal standards for borders, recognizing that every species had the right to defend its home. They called it the Earth Accord. We never asked for it, but it was a sign that the galaxy was finally ready to change. And it all started because one arrogant commander picked a fight with the wrong quiet little planet. "We don't want to be the poster child for this movement," she explained to Speaker Tom Van in a private meeting. "We just want to be one species among many with the right to tell invaders to get off our lawn." "I get that," Tom Van replied, "but you have to see the bigger picture. The Earth Accord is a game changer for the entire galaxy. For thousands of years, the rule was simple: might makes right. The big guys expanded, and the little guys got squashed. Your actions showed everyone there's another way. That tech and sheer grit can stand up to raw power. It proved that the small can defend themselves if they're willing to pay the price." "That price was 500,000 souls, Chen said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, and because of what they paid," he continued, "millions, maybe billions of others might be saved. Those aggressive empires that used to bully smaller worlds are suddenly thinking twice. They're choosing trade over invasion and diplomacy over threats. These are good things, Ambassador, even if they were born from a tragedy." The Earth Accord was a massive success, passing with almost unanimous support. Only 3 species voted no. all of them old-school empires built on conquest. Their complaints were noted and promptly ignored. Following the new rules, dozens of other species set up their own no-go zones, though none were as absolute as Earth's. Most just used regular fleets and fancy sensor arrays, but the idea was the same. Here's our line in the sand. Cross it, and you'll find out what happens. For ages, wars never really stopped. Different species still argued, fought over resources, and every now and then things got ugly. But something changed. Boundaries were finally taken seriously. Warnings had real teeth. The old idea that the biggest fleet always wins, that wasn't a sure thing anymore. 5 years after the entire Zithran fleet simply vanished, Ambassador Chen delivered her farewell speech to the Galactic Council. The first time I stood here and declared Earth's exclusion zone, I remember some of you laughing, she started. You looked at us as the new kids, naive, maybe a little arrogant. You couldn't wrap your heads around the idea that a species so fresh on the galactic scene could actually enforce a claim like that. The Zithran Empire put that idea to the test, and what happened next rewrote galactic history forever. She let that sink in, her eyes scanning the faces of representatives who over the years went from laughing at her to being terrified of her, and finally to treating her with a heavy dose of respect. I won't apologize for our actions. My government did what it had to do to protect our people, and we did it well. But I need to be clear about one thing. We never wanted you to be afraid of us. We just wanted to be left alone. We wanted the chance to grow at our own speed, to mess things up on our own terms, and to build our own future without bigger species seeing us as an easy meal. The exclusion net gave us that chance, but it also gave us something we never wanted, a reputation as the one species in the galaxy you just don't touch. Now, people whisper about us. They wonder what other kinds of weapons we're hiding away. They treat us with a careful politeness that comes from fear, not friendship. She shook her head, a slow, sad motion. This isn't the relationship we wanted with the rest of you, but it's the one you left us with. When we politely asked for our own space, you ignored us. It was only when we showed you the price for stepping over our line that you finally started listening. That says a lot about the way this galaxy works, and I truly hope the next generation finds a way to change it. The Earth Accord is a good start. By acknowledging that every species has the right to defend its own home, we're building a foundation for real respect. But respect that's built on fear is as fragile as glass. True respect is born from understanding, from sharing our cultures, from seeing one another as partners instead of potential enemies. A small smile touched her lips. My replacement, Ambassador David Martinez, is dedicated to that goal. He's younger than I am, not as jaded, and way more optimistic about where the galaxy is headed. I hope he has every reason to be. And I hope that one day, everyone will remember the Zithran fleet not as a display of human might, but as the very last time anyone had to learn this lesson the hard way. The entire chamber rose to its feet, giving her a standing ovation, an honor almost unheard of for a departing ambassador. Chen gave a slight bow and walked out of the chamber for the last time. She went back to Earth and settled into a quiet life in the mountains, where she wrote her memoirs and sometimes spoke to students of diplomacy. She never went back to space, never laid eyes on the exclusion zone again, and never visited the memorial station that listed the names of the Cassandra's crew. But she thought of them. She thought of Captain Torres and how calmly she accepted her fate, and of Commander Velixoth, whose arrogance cost him everything. She thought of all the lives lost because a simple warning was ignored. In her book, published 3 years after she retired, she wrote, "History will argue about whether what Earth did was right. Some will claim we were monsters who went too far. Others will say we didn't go far enough, that we should have made an even bigger statement. I think both sides missed the point. We did exactly what we promised we would do. We drew a line, we told everyone what would happen if they crossed it, and when our warnings were ignored, we kept our word. That isn't cruelty. It's consistency. And in a galaxy where might makes right is often the only rule, sometimes being consistent is the deadliest weapon you have. 10 years after the incident, the memorial station at the edge of the zone got a new, unexpected neighbor. The Zitharan Federation, in cooperation with several other species that had also lost people in past conflicts, built a second monument right next to Earth's. This one listed every single name from the Zitharan fleet. 500,000 names were etched into metal plates designed to last for thousands of years. Beneath the endless list of names was a simple message. They were following orders. They believed in their mission. They ignored the warnings and paid the highest price. Let their loss teach us that pride is no substitute for wisdom. Let their memory be a reminder that every choice has a consequence. And let their names be a warning to all who come after. When someone draws a line, listen. When someone says no, respect it. And never believe that your strength gives you the right to trample on the rights of others. On the day the new monument was officially revealed, ships from 30 different species gathered at the boundary. Not a single one crossed into the exclusion zone. They were just there to watch, to remember, and to acknowledge the lesson that had been so brutally taught. A human delegation was there too, led by Ambassador Martinez. He gave a short speech, his voice broadcast to all the ships gathered in the silent dark. We are here today, not to celebrate a victory or mourn a loss, but to mark a moment when the galaxy fundamentally changed, he said. The names on this monument belong to people who died because boundaries were ignored. Their deaths could have been avoided. Their sacrifice didn't have to happen, but because of it, we have a legacy. No one should ever have to learn this lesson again. He paused for a moment before adding, Earth offers its deepest sympathies to the Zitharan Federation and to every species that has lost someone in this tragedy. We hope that one day the galaxy will grow past the need for these kinds of demonstrations. We hope that future generations will respect boundaries, not out of fear, but because it's the right thing to do. Until that day arrives, the exclusion net stays on. The boundary is absolute, and the warning is crystal clear. He motioned to the two monuments. Let these stand side by side, human and Zithan, a warning and a memorial, a reminder of what happens when arrogance meets consequence, and a symbol of hope that one day such reminders won't be needed at all. The ceremony concluded, the ship slowly departed, and the monuments remained, two silent sentinels marking the spot where 300 warships once entered and never left. The years turned into decades. The galaxy kept spinning. Empires rose and fell. Wars broke out and were settled. But Earth's exclusion zone was a constant, unwavering and absolute. Trade routes were redrawn to give it a wide berth, and ships passed by it every single day. Captains would point it out to rookies, telling them the story of the Zitharan fleet to make sure they understood exactly why that detour was on the charts. You see that empty space? They'd say, pointing to the navigation screen. That's human territory. You stay out. The line is real. The warnings aren't suggestions. And if you start thinking you're the exception to the rule, just remember, the Zitharan Empire thought the exact same thing. Back on Earth, the incident became required reading at military academies, taught not as a victory but as a grim lesson on the true cost of keeping the peace. Cadets learned how the exclusion net was developed, how it was deployed, and how terrifyingly effective it was. But they also learned about the cost, 500,000 lives, the shattering of an empire, and the heavy burden of being known forever as the species that weaponized empty space. The question on the final exam was always the same. If you could go back in time, knowing everything you know now, would you still give the order to activate the exclusion net? There was no right answer. The point of the question was to force them to wrestle with the incredible weight of command, the gap between having power and using it, and the responsibility that comes with both. Most cadets answered yes, pointing to the decades of peace that followed. Some said no, insisting there had to have been another way to protect Earth without such a horrifying outcome. And a few would simply write, "I don't know," admitting that some choices are just too massive for a simple right or wrong. All three answers earned a perfect score. 50 years after the incident, a young historian from a species that hadn't even achieved spaceflight when the Zethran fleet disappeared managed to get an interview with one of the last living officers from Earth's Strategic Defense Command, a woman who helped create the exclusion net. "Do you have any regrets?" the historian asked, "about building something so final?" The old officer, her hair bone-white and her hands trembling with age, thought about the question for a very long time. "Every single day," she finally said. "And not at all, both at the exact same time." "How is that even possible?" "Because we built the net knowing it would either save our world or shatter our souls," she answered. "We managed the first part. We bought humanity safety, independence, and the time it needed to grow without being constantly threatened. But we paid a heavy price for that safety. We became the people that others in the galaxy don't respect. They fear us. And that fear has cut us off in ways we never could have imagined. But you'd do it again." "Yes. Because the other option was to stay a target, to invite every bully to take a shot, to fight endless wars until one day we lost. We chose another way. We chose to make one terrible, unforgettable example to prevent 1,000 smaller fights. The numbers say we made the right call, but numbers can't feel the weight of 500,000 ghosts." The historian published the interview in a much larger book about how the exclusion net had reshaped galactic politics. The title of the book was simple: The Price of Quiet, the warning that changed everything. The book was an instant bestseller on hundreds of worlds. It was translated into thousands of languages and became required reading for diplomats, historians, and military nerds everywhere. Its main point was that the showdown at Earth's border was a massive turning point for galactic history, the exact moment when a clever defense proved to be stronger than a giant fleet. But the book's last chapter, titled The Cost of Peace, wasn't about strategy or politics. It was about the people. It told the story of the crew of the Cassandra, who volunteered to deliver one last warning. It talked about the Zaran officers who were just following orders, flying straight into nothingness. It remembered the families on both sides who lost people they loved, and the heavy weight carried by the people who designed, approved, and flipped the switch on the exclusion net. At the end of the day, the historian wrote, "The real question isn't whether Earth had the right to defend itself. The question is what kind of galaxy we actually want to live in. One where borders are respected out of fear, or one where they're respected because we all agree that everyone deserves their own space." Earth gave us the first option. Now, it's on the rest of us to build the second. A century after the Zithran fleet simply vanished, the exclusion zone was still there, still working, still a hard line you did not cross, but the galaxy around it had changed. New species weren't constantly looking over their shoulders, worried about the next big empire. Borders were recognized. Warnings were taken seriously. The old idea that having the most ships guaranteed a win was gone. It was replaced by a smarter, more careful understanding that any species, if pushed hard enough, could get creative and build a defense that made traditional war a fool's game. It wasn't a perfect galaxy. There was still conflict, competition, and sometimes fighting. But the rules of the game had changed. And you could trace that change all the way back to a simple message still guarding the edge of human space. Stay out. 2 words that taught the galaxy a lesson it would never, ever forget. Back on Earth's capital, tucked away in a quiet garden dedicated to peace, there's a monument that almost no outsiders ever get to see. It lists the name of every single person involved in making the exclusion net, from the scientists who dreamed up the theory, to the engineers who built the platforms, to the politicians who gave the final, terrible order. And beneath all the names, there's one last message. We did what we thought was necessary for humanity to survive. History can decide if we were right. We can only hope that one day our children will live in a galaxy where weapons like this are no longer needed. Until that day, we stand guard. We hold the line, and we remember the price of peace. Above the monument, the stars shine on, silent and endless, tracing the paths of countless ships flying across the galaxy. And every single one of them steers well clear of one small patch of space where 300 warships once entered and were never seen again. The warning is still there, the border is still closed, and the galaxy has finally learned to listen.